Hello everybody and welcome to our webinar, which is to discuss issues around the APM Body of Knowledge 6th edition. My name is Liz Wilson and I'm Head of Professional Standards and Knowledge here at the Association for Project Management, and my key role is to look after the knowledge assets that we have here at the APM, which includes the body of knowledge and also includes the qualifications, the competence framework and CPD and RPP. So what we want to do today is to explore the concept of a body of knowledge. I think without going into too much detail of the technical or philosophical nature of that, to think about what constitutes a body of knowledge and what its purpose is. To look specifically at the purpose and scope of the APM body of knowledge. To look at the opportunities that we have with what we've called Box 6, the Body of Knowledge Plus, which is the interactive website, and then to have a question and answer session. What I'd like to start off by doing is exploring what's meant by a body of knowledge. So I want to think what can be understood by the term body of knowledge. As I say, I'm not intending to turn this into a philosophical debate, but I think it's probably quite important that we develop a common understanding about what we mean. Each of the statements in the next few slides is taken from easily accessible definitions from a small number of professional institutes, from Wikipedia and such like things. So you can, if you want to scour the web yourself, you're perfectly at liberty to do that. But it does give you some kind of idea about what other professional institutes and other professional bodies think about what a body of knowledge might be. So, what's meant by a body of knowledge? Here's one definition. Is it the core teachings, skills and research in a field or industry? What does that sound like? Does that represent what it is that we think professional organisations should consider in relation to their own body of knowledge? Does it cover the things that people need to learn about, the things that people need to be able to do, and the things that people need to be able to research? Or, for example, is it the essential competencies which individuals need to master and achieve accreditation before applying these principles in practice? The previous definition was more focused on brain activity than action and applicable to a field of study or to an industry. This definition seems to have leapt to something which applies to an individual. It introduces something called essential competencies which someone needs to master and be accredited to put principles in practice. But does that really reflect a definition of a body of knowledge as opposed to competence or other activities? Here's a further definition, a framework that defines the current boundaries of knowledge of the profession. Again, this moves away from the individual back to the concept of the profession, but we've lost the notion of core or essential to the concept of a framework, which sets some boundaries as to what's in and what's out. Is that a helpful way of considering what a body of knowledge is supposed to do? Another commonly used definition of a body of knowledge is to suggest that it's a definition of the vocabulary accepted within a professional domain so that communication between practitioners can be coherent and consistent. This is often used by a large number of professional associations to describe what's in their body of knowledge, but an interesting discussion around whether vocabulary helps or hinders was given by the recent Knowledge SIG event on the courageous conversation. So I would suggest that's one of the things you could look at on the website to see another discussion about whether a common vocabulary is actually something which is good because it means that we can all have consistent conversations, or whether it's, in quotes, bad because it might prevent people who don't share the vocabulary from joining in, or enable those people who do have the vocabulary to dominate and drive the profession in a particular way. Another definition of a body of knowledge is the tools and techniques used in the domain of practitioners. Again, the question here is whether tools and techniques constitute knowledge or whether they're actually a reflection of practice, because they would tend to cover techniques, skills, attributes and competencies. APM has defined the body of knowledge in the 6th edition as the concepts, terms or activities that make up the professional domain. There's a subsequent rider to this that it's not a description of the entire body of knowledge, but a guide and a common structure for project, programme and portfolio activities. It's perhaps quite important for us to emphasise that the APM body of knowledge is not intended to be the repository of all project management knowledge. It's not a syllabus, it's not curriculum, a training programme or a certification regime, but it is a framework in which project, program and portfolio profession can be defined. It's more than simply a collection of terms or information. It's more than a professional reading list. It's more than a library. It's more than a website or a collection of websites. And it's more than a description of professional functions. One of the challenges that I often raise with people when talking about a body of knowledge is to refer back to my own disciplines. I'm a historian by training and a professional manager by occupation. And if I were to speak to my colleagues in the world of history or the world of management and say, can you produce for me a book that's the body of knowledge for history or for management, they would look at me with a degree of horror and suggest that it's not actually possible to do that. It's interesting that a number of professional domains have tried to produce their bodies of knowledge in a way which can be produced and published as a book. But I think we have to be careful to understand that what's published as a body of knowledge by the APM is not the complete, total definition of what might be contained within the world of project, program and portfolio management. What I'd like to do now is to look in a little bit of detail about the purpose and the scope of the APM Body of Knowledge version 6, and perhaps a little bit of background here. APM published its first Body of Knowledge in 1992 and has published a series of editions of the Body of Knowledge up until the latest version, Body of Knowledge version 6, in 2012. I haven't taken the time and the trouble to produce an analysis of the content of the Body of Knowledge version 1, which was duplicated on A4 paper and bound together with comb binding in comparison to the Body of Knowledge version 6. But there is a degree of commonality between the documents because at the end of the day, project management doesn't vary very much from year to year and from time to time. What we have done in Body of Knowledge version 6 is to do several things. We've brought together in a very holistic way project, program and portfolio management activities. These were referenced in the Body of Knowledge version 5, but they've been absolutely highlighted and expressed in more clear detail in the Body of Knowledge version 6. What we've also done is taken the approach of a functional analysis of what constitutes project, program and portfolio management, as opposed to considering, for example, the project management life cycle or looking at project management methodologies. So the functional analysis, and this is referred to in the documentation of the Body of Knowledge. If you have a copy of the document in front of you, we'll look at it shortly. And the intention of that is to consider what needs to happen in order for project management, portfolio management and program management to function effectively. So the approach focuses on the fundamental activities involved in these activities rather than specific techniques or organisational structures. And the intention here is to create a stable set of topics that will be less affected by the evolution of good practice. So by looking at functions rather than specific tasks and activities, we're trying to future-proof as far as we can some of the activities contained within the Body of Knowledge. The next thing that we've tried to do with the Body of Knowledge version 6 is to make it hierarchical, so that there are different levels within the structure which all relate to each other, rather like a biological taxonomy. The different levels of the structure will suit different levels of activity. So, for example, qualifications might be based at the lowest level of the hierarchy, but a maturity model might be based on a higher level of the hierarchy, and methodologies will sit somewhere in between the two. And there's also the concept of a matrix which is inside the structure of the Body of Knowledge version 6. So this is where the functions form one axis and the dimensions of project, program and portfolio form the other axis. So this enables the reader to consider all aspects of, for example, risk management on one dimension or all aspects of program management on the other. Further, what we've done with this Body of Knowledge is to make it the first one which has been designed specifically to be used in electronic form. So the style and the structure will lend themselves to being viewed according to the varying requirements of individuals and organisations. And then finally, we've divided into not 4 candles, but 4 sections. So the 4 sections that we cover deal with context, which deal with the way that program, project and portfolio fit within the broader organisation. People address the interpersonal skills and the nature of the profession. Delivery is a section that covers the tools and techniques associated with project, program and portfolio management, and interfaces describe the very important general management areas that are of particular importance to the project, program or portfolio manager. And this is what the body of knowledge looks like on the website. So there's an introductory section which welcomes you to the body of knowledge and enables you to navigate your way through the structure. And as I've just described, we have the 4 sections of context, people, delivery and interfaces. And each of those has some further information about what they are. So let's go and have a look at what it says about context in this environment. And what we get, as you'll see here, is a description on the left-hand side of the screen in relation to the definition of the way that the organisation, the body of knowledge is structured. So we have an information that says whether or not where the definition sits, and it talks about, then there's a general section which explains context. So in terms of this context, it says the section is generic to projects, programs and portfolios, and then it takes us through a whole section which interfaces in relation to the general issues in relation to context. Then in this case there's a diagram which explains how these things sit together, and then in each of the sections we have a section on project, a section on program and a section on portfolio. In the case of context, you'll see that it says that the definition suggests it's common to project, program and portfolio. So there isn't any need for us to have separate definitions. If we look at other sections, for example delivery, and we go into, for example, risk management, we have a definition of risk management, and then we have a general section. This is a common structure to all of the body of knowledge. So there's a general section which describes in broad detail what risk management in this section is about, and then it goes through to take the detail of what risk management might mean in the context of project, as a project manager, what it might mean in the context of program, as a program manager, and what it might mean in the context of portfolio, as a portfolio manager. So that's a common structure which applies across all the entries in the body of knowledge. And if we go back up to the top of the page, you will also see that the BOP Plus structure also includes definitions of further reading, so it gives some suggestions as to what further reading might be appropriate in the context of the risk management section. There are a number of navigational toolbars which will enable you to look at different aspects of the body of knowledge, and this enables you to navigate through to see what the content of the body of knowledge is. If we go to the section about the body of knowledge, and if we go into the body of knowledge structure, this, in the 4 sections that we've talked about, context, people, delivery and interfaces, we see that we have in this hierarchical and functional structure subsections. So under context we have governance 1.1 and then setting 1.2, and then each of those is further subdivided into subsections which support the description of governance, the description of setting. The same in people, we have subsections which break down what the content of the body of knowledge is in those particular areas. You'll see that the major section is of course in delivery, and this is where one might say the heart of what people would recognise as project management sits. So go through that and you can see all the aspects that you would expect to see inside project management. In each of the sections, those are subdivided into their interface with project, program and portfolio. In designing the body of knowledge version 6, one of the fundamental aspects that was taken into account was that the body of knowledge version 5 wasn't actually that broken. So what's happened is that rather than redesigning the body of knowledge from start to finish, we've taken a significant proportion of the content from the Body of Knowledge version 5 and repurposed it to suit this functional structure, this functional breakdown structure, which enables all of these sections to be related to one another and all of them to be defined at similar levels of disaggregation. So, for example, the way in which section 1.1.1 project management is disaggregated is similar to the way in which section 3.7.1 is disaggregated. So they all sit in that relationship to one another as if they were a taxonomy. What the body of knowledge doesn't do is determine how people might be assessed or evaluated against the content. So it is very much a description of the knowledge that's required in a variety of different functional areas within project, program and portfolio management. Some of the things that we might want to consider that the body of knowledge might be. And there are a number of analogies that have been brought forward in the way in which we've defined the body of knowledge that you might find it helpful to consider. So one of the things that it's been described as is a palette of colours, but not the picture or the style. So in the same way that Constable at one end of the spectrum or Rothko at the other end of the spectrum would use the same colour palette, but they would paint their pictures in a very different way and paint their pictures in a very different style. So the body of knowledge can be used by professional practitioners in a variety of different ways to suit their particular needs. Another way of describing it would be to consider it as a set of ingredients, but not the cake or the other things that could be made with them. So you could take a set of ingredients and make a variety of different things with them, and the same is true of the body of knowledge now. It's possible to be able to combine different components of the body of knowledge into different ways to enable practitioners to determine which is the best way to suit their particular needs. Another way of describing it is to consider it as being a bookshelf and the labels, but not the books. So we have a structure, we have a framework, we have a way of putting things into place, but we don't necessarily have the full range of detail that might sit in the particular library, as it were. Or finally, we might consider it as a periodic table, but it's not the compounds or the reactions between the elements. So very, very strongly, the way in which the body of knowledge has been designed in the 6th edition is to provide fundamental building blocks for project, program and portfolio management practitioners to be able to build together those aspects which are appropriate to their needs and appropriate to their requirements. Everybody sees the world in different ways, so hopefully at least one of these analogies will help you appreciate the opportunities that this approach opens up. I'm sure there are many other analogies that we could use, but we hope that's a helpful way of considering that there are plenty of different opportunities to engage with the body of knowledge and the content that's contained therein. One of the other things that we're very keen to consider is what the opportunities give us for BOP Plus. Up until now, APM's bodies of knowledge have been published as books, which is lovely, and they're very nice, but it does mean that they become very static and not open to a great deal of interface and interplay with the project management community. So one of the things we want to do with BOP Plus is to take a very wide and a very broad view about what's of value to users. So as well as including the further reading which we've talked about and the links to blogs and other discussions that are going on, we want to start generating additional content which is much less about the flat knowledge that might exist and much more around how these things might apply in the real world. So, for example, we might want to do some work on comparing and contrasting, such things as using Agile versus Waterfall in a specific project context rather than focusing on technical descriptions of each. We believe this is one of the values that there is in the body of knowledge, plus to be able to expose to practitioners other people's views on how different techniques might have value in their professional and day-to-day work. We also want to consider cross-cutting themes. So the way that the body of knowledge is structured now, it enables quite easily people to review requirements for project, program and portfolio across the whole range of the functions in the body of knowledge, rather than having to dig down into separate detail. So there is the opportunity within the body of knowledge version 6 and in the BOP Plus to be able to look across the whole range of activities related to these activities and indeed other activities. And one of the things that we think is really quite important is to look through customized lenses as to what the content of the body of knowledge might mean to different people, different professions, different organizations, different roles within the project management community. So we have the opportunity with BOP Plus to start looking at how the different components of the body of knowledge might be appropriately clustered together to meet different requirements and different roles. One of the key examples that we've talked about recently is the PMO, for example. So looking at the content of the body of knowledge and seeing how different components of the body of knowledge might be clustered together to meet the requirements of PMO specialists. And this is something that we're looking forward to developing much more in the future, so that we can develop useful and valuable material to help people make sense of the body of knowledge and to make it apply to their environment, so that they can actually make use of it rather than simply having it on a bookshelf. So some of the things we need to consider in relation to the body of knowledge are: to what extent is it a living and breathing document? Is it set in stone, or is it set in soap? The purpose here really is to suggest that some things need to be fixed, but there are ways of doing this that don't have to fossilize the body of knowledge. Some of the things from a body of knowledge which people expect to see are, for example, qualifications. We currently have a suite of qualifications which is related to the body of knowledge version 5, and there is a project which has just started to realign those qualifications with the body of knowledge version 6. Quite clearly, it's important that things like qualifications have some stability in terms of the content. It would be completely inappropriate, as happened earlier on this year, to change horses midstream and to ask candidates to sit a qualification, in this case it was GCSEs, where the requirements were changed in between the candidates doing the studying and the examinations being taken. So we need to make sure that there's a clear specification which is standard and not changing for qualifications which are based on the body of knowledge, so that those studying for the qualifications have a clear perspective on what is contained within those qualifications and what isn't. So that's an important aspect of what we need to do to further develop the body of knowledge, to make sure those qualification specifications are met. Another key aspect that we need to consider is the development of the competence framework. APM has published a competence framework which has been available since 2006. The current competence framework has a one-to-one relationship with the body of knowledge version 5. One of the things that we need to do taking things forward is to look at the competence framework and to consider how we update that in line with the requirements of the body of knowledge version 6. Again, because people are assessed against the competence framework and because organizations are assessed against the competence framework, there is a need to have some stability in what the content of that competence framework is. So again, that would be an area where there would be some stability in terms of the content. And finally, there's accreditation of accredited training providers, accreditation of corporates, and accreditation of academic providers, where there is a need to make sure that there isn't a moving target that people have to hit. So we would suggest that what's going to come out of the body of knowledge in relation to these are going to be fairly fixed criteria against which individuals and organizations can be assessed. But there are some things that don't need to be set in stone, or perhaps shouldn't be set in stone. Let's think about what those might be. and what we want the body of knowledge to be able to embrace, certainly in terms of the BOP Plus on the website. Leading edge thinking and leading edge practice needs to be something which is allowed to grow and develop organically. The nature of a body of knowledge is, of course, that it's been developed by practitioners for practitioners on a consensus basis, which inevitably means that it has to reflect a consensus view of what acceptable knowledge and practice is. That is clearly not going to be able to capture leading edge thinking, new practice, or evolving practice to meet different and changing needs. That's where we believe the value of BOP Plus is absolutely vital, because it provides the forum and the platform for practitioners to comment on what's contained in the current body of knowledge and to suggest how what's contained in there might be evolving to meet current and future industrial and sector needs, and how we might think about the world in very different ways. So that's something which will occur inside the body of knowledge plus, which will ultimately lead to changes to the full version of the body of knowledge. Some other things that won't be captured within the body of knowledge as it is at the moment are the what ifs. What if something different happens? What if 9/11 happens? What if there's a volcano in Norway again that prevents us all from getting to where we want to on aeroplanes? So there are going to be a number of aspects of thinking and response to the world which a body of knowledge can't, as a static document, capture. But the body of knowledge plus provides the forum for practitioners to discuss and debate how the body of knowledge needs to be updated and revised to cope with these conditional events and activities. And then finally, innovation, planned innovation and necessity being the mother of invention and innovation. A body of knowledge can't capture this because by its very nature it is at the new edge of thinking, the new edge of activity, the new edge of practice. This is again where the body of knowledge website, the BOP Plus, provides the opportunity for practitioners to engage in a discussion and a debate about how thinking is moving forward, how practice is moving forward, and whether or not new ideas, new activities, new concepts, new methodologies need to be incorporated within the body of knowledge. So are we getting lots and lots of questions coming in? We've got a few questions coming in. What I would like to suggest some final thoughts on what we have so far with the Body of Knowledge version 6 and the Body of Knowledge Plus. I believe they provide a robust structure and a taxonomy which can facilitate progress and development in our thinking and achievement. And I think it's important that we have such a structure and a taxonomy so that we can categorize and deal with new and emerging thought, new activities, new concepts, new discussions. I believe it provides us with a consensus platform for the profession to shape and influence practice by sharing ideas and concepts. I was in a meeting a few weeks ago when I talked about the body of knowledge being pan-sector, and I'd interpreted that in my own way as meaning that it applied universally to all sectors. It was replayed back to me that it could be interpreted as meaning that everybody had to do everything in the body of knowledge. And that's clearly not what is the intention here. The intention is that what we have in the body of knowledge is at a sufficient level of generality to be able to apply to all the environments in which project, programme and portfolio management take place. And that actually is the whole of the UK economy. So what we need to have in the body of knowledge and the body of knowledge plus is the opportunity to engage not just with traditional project management ideas, but also ideas and concepts which emerge from other and newer industries who are engaging with project, programme and portfolio management. And finally, it gives us a mechanism to continually evolve our perspectives to help individuals and organisations improve what they do. It provides us with a platform to have that discussion and to have that debate and to consider ways in which what we currently have can be made better to help us take the world forward. So, do we have some questions that we can consider?
Yep, we do have some questions, Liz. First one is from Martin Buckle, and Martin says, what is a strategy for aligning BOC with Prince 2?
That's a very, very interesting question. One of the things that we did debate, or was debated in the development of the Body of Knowledge version 6, was whether or not APM should specifically plump for one methodology as opposed to another methodology. The consensus view of those who contributed to the body of knowledge was that we wanted to be able to have a body of knowledge which embraced or could embrace all possible current and emerging methodologies. So there's quite a deliberate decision which was made not to specifically align with a particular methodology. So Prince 2, which is a methodology, does actually put itself into a particular place in relation to knowledge. The functional approach allows us to incorporate Prince 2 within the definitions of the body of knowledge, but it's not something which we're going to separately identify. So, for example, we could take the concepts of the methodology of Prince 2, which does tend to follow a project life cycle from start to finish, and we can identify where that sits in the body of knowledge in relation to, for example, the delivery mechanisms. But there's not an intention to specifically map the body of knowledge with Prince 2 as things stand at the moment, but there is the opportunity for us when we revise the qualifications to consider how we realign the APMP, which currently has a route for Prince 2 practitioners, so that that route remains. So there is a clear opportunity for progression between Prince 2 and APM qualifications. And I think it's probably also worth saying that this doesn't just apply to Prince 2 in terms of how the methodology fits within the body of knowledge. Other methodologies such as Agile can also be accommodated within the body of knowledge.
Okay, thank you, Liz. Next question is from Mark Johnson. Mark asks, I'm just starting out with qualifications. Is there an estimate of when Box 6 will be the core material for the qualifications?
Again, that's a very good question, and thank you for raising it. We are at the moment just embarking on the project which will realign our existing qualifications to the Body of Knowledge version 6. The intention is that the base content of the syllabuses will, for introductory certificate and for APMP, will be redefined by the end of September this year, with the intention that those will then be provided to accredited training providers, and the first examinations based on new syllabuses aligned to the Body of Knowledge version 6 will be available from May next year.
Okay, thank you. Next question is from Sam Pettifer. Sam asks, is there an intention to have the BOC available as an app or a Kindle product?
We certainly are in the process of developing a Kindle version of the Body of Knowledge, which will be available later this year. I don't understand the detail of it, but there are some technical issues about making the Body of Knowledge available as a Kindle because it has diagrams and other figures within it which present not enormous technical difficulties, but I think it makes the reading of it on a Kindle fairly difficult. At the moment, we don't have any plans to develop an app. It'd be quite interesting to get your perspectives as to what you'd like it to be as an app, because there's quite a lot of detail in the Body of Knowledge, and to convert it into an app might, to some extent, attack the integrity of the Body of Knowledge version 6 as it is. But we'd be interested to know, from a user point of view, what it is that you would want to use an app of the Body of Knowledge version 6 for, and then we'd investigate as to whether or not we could develop something that should meet that need. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Next question is from D. Rowe. D says, in relation to the project to align qualifications to Box 6, if I want to get an APM qualification with a view to sitting exams early 2014, should I start by studying Box 6 or Box 5?
The intention will be that there will be no examinations based on the Body of Knowledge version 6 until the end of April, early May 2014. So my advice to you, if you're thinking about taking the examinations in spring, is to follow the current syllabus, which is aligned to the Body of Knowledge version 5. I do think it's important to say that the content of the Body of Knowledge version 5 continues to appear within the Body of Knowledge version 6. It's not new and different content. It's just sliced up in a slightly different way.
Okay, thank you. Next question is from Rebecca Bishop. Rebecca says, what advice would you give when developing a BOC within an organisation?
That's a very large question. There are some interesting things to consider in relation to a body of knowledge. The most important thing is to say, why are you doing it? What is the purpose in what you're doing? What is it that you're trying to develop? Is it that you want to have a specification of knowledge, or is it that you're trying to do something else? Because I have a feeling that bodies of knowledge inside an organisation perhaps might be much more related to the kind of organisational improvements that you want to make rather than the knowledge that people need to have. So maybe you might need to consider whether you want knowledge, whether you want competence, whether you want organisational criteria in terms of improving performance. I'd mainly say if you're looking at project, program and portfolio management, don't bother doing it because we've already done it with Body of Knowledge version 6.
Okay, thank you. Next question is from Bruce Waters. Bruce says, are there opportunities for providing case studies linked to BOC?
I think that's again an extremely good question, and yes, that's one of the things that we want to look at in terms of developing the Body of Knowledge Plus on the website, is to look at the way case studies around particular projects, particular issues, particular problems which have been solved are able to provide illustrations which are helpful to the rest of the practitioner and the professional community to suggest how better to improve projects, programs and portfolio. The key thing for us to consider is to be able to link it in to the taxonomy for the body of knowledge. So if there is a case study, what's its specific theme or focus in relation to the body of knowledge? Is it particularly related to projects that have failed or been particularly successful? Is it related to program? Is it related to portfolio? Is it related to one of the functional areas within the body of knowledge, one of the 4 sections or one of the subsections within the sections? And those are the things that we need to look at in terms of making sure that putting in case studies actually had some relevance to the practitioner community rather than just overloading the Wikipedia approach with lots and lots of material. And we clearly want to make these things user-friendly. So yes, we want to do it, but we need to make sure that what we're doing is adding value to the practitioner community.
Thanks, Liz. Next question is from Andrew Ingleby. Andrew asks, can you give a flavour of the ways corporate members and other organisations are using the APM BOC in practice?
That's again, a very interesting question. Our experience of what corporate organisations tend to do is, if they're being good at their project, programme and portfolio activities, they tend to take a holistic view of what's required to make their project successful. So the body of knowledge would be one of the dimensions that they would take into account. They would usually also take into account, as well as the knowledge cycle that they needed to be involved in, the competencies that they needed, both as an organisation and in relation to the project, programme and portfolio activities. They'd also be considering the extent to which the people whom they were using were qualified in relation to their particular roles and how they continued to develop and approach their continuing professional development. So corporates will tend to use the body of knowledge in combination with a number of other components of the 5 dimensions of professionalism rather than simply to access the body of knowledge on its own. The body of knowledge is, at the end of the day, a fairly flat series of references. It's a set of statements, if you like, around knowledge, and it really needs to have some flavour put into it for corporates to be able to use it effectively.
Okay, thank you. Next question is from Darren Niles. I've just passed the APM introductory certificate and am due to sit the APMP in July. Would it be worthwhile redoing these qualifications when they are updated to align with BOP 6? Again,
a very interesting and a very valuable question. Well done for passing your introductory certificate and good luck with your APMP. And no, you can't bribe me to tell you what the answers are going to be. The answer to that is absolutely there's no reason to redo the qualifications. The introductory certificate and the APMP will continue to have the value that they have, whether they're based on the Body of Knowledge version 5 or the Body of Knowledge version 6. It's a normal process in qualifications for them to be updated on a regular basis, but it doesn't devalue the qualification that you have by taking the current qualifications rather than waiting until the new versions come out for the Body of Knowledge version 6. They're absolutely equivalent.
Thanks, Liz. Next question is from Amajit Walia. Amajit asks, what plans are there for being able to assess against BOP 6? Is this where the competence framework would be helpful?
Again, a very interesting and very valuable question. The Body of Knowledge version 6 will obviously be a key point of reference for the introductory certificate and the APMP qualifications, which are knowledge-based, so that's an obvious point of contact for those. In terms of competence-based qualifications, well, I suppose the clue's in the question really. We will develop a competence framework which takes into account the redesign of the Body of Knowledge, but clearly one will need to express the content of the Body of Knowledge in a competence statement rather than the way that it's expressed at the moment. So yes, the intention will be to redevelop the competence framework so that that will be the point of potential assessment for competence for individuals, but will also provide a benchmark which can be used by corporate organisations and indeed other organisations who wish to assess their capability.
Thank you. Next question is from Alan Turner. Alan asks, how frequently will the BOP Plus recommended reading material be updated as and when new PM-related books are published?
Again, a very valuable question. The frequency of updating will obviously depend on when these things are published. We'll have to be dependent on when new material comes up. In every case, what we would need to do would be to establish what the newly published material or book related to in terms of the body of knowledge structure. We would have to make sure that the content of the material went through an appropriate review with appropriately qualified practitioners from our point of view to make sure that APM was happy to recommend this as prescribed reading in relation to the body of knowledge. But there will also be the opportunity for other appropriate material which may not necessarily be recommended reading or referenced reading, but which may be of interest because of the way it approaches a particular subject. So it will be updated in terms of the Body of Knowledge Plus on an as-needed basis.
Thanks, Liz. Next question is from Stuart Dixon. Stuart asks, who will be able to add items to the BOC? Will there be a group of editors? Can anybody add items? Will the APM specific interest groups be involved in the editing process?
That seemed like a several-part question. I might have to ask David to repeat bits of it as I go through. The answer is that anybody who reads the body of knowledge and has access to it is able to make suggestions for improvements, alteration and change. The next part of the question is who's going to be responsible for dealing with that? Well, there will be an editorial process within APM which will draw heavily on the practitioners whom we know to be able to determine the extent to which the suggested changes, improvements or amendments to the body of knowledge are appropriate and represent what we want to appear in the body of knowledge. So any suggestions for substantive alterations of the body of knowledge will go through a similar editorial process to that which was adopted to develop the body of knowledge in the first place. So there will be some quite robust peer assessment of any suggested changes and alterations. Certainly specific interest groups are in pole position, as it were, to suggest alterations, improvements, amendments and changes, but they're clearly not the only group of interested people who might be in a position to make suggested changes, but we would also be, where appropriate, drawing on the specific interest group community to help us determine the appropriateness of suggested changes. And it may well be that somebody would suggest a change which perhaps isn't appropriate to take forward immediately, but which could form part of either a blog or a discussion, or could form part of a discussion group to determine whether or not this was an appropriate way for us to take things forward. We will be looking later this year at how we engage with people who are prepared to volunteer to be reviewers to help us keep the BOC up to date and to make sure that it reflects good and current practice. And this will be publicised in members' newsletters and on the website.
Thanks, Liz. Next question is from Michael Waite. Michael says, is there a meaningful alignment or conflict with the PM BOC?
Again, it's a really very, very interesting question. One of the freedoms that we have as APM, because we're not aligned to a specific methodology, meant that we could take a revised functional approach to expressing what's in the body of knowledge. The PMBOK is very, very strongly focused around methodology in the same way that Prince 2 is very strongly focused around methodology. So there is alignment with some aspects of the PMBOK, but we haven't undertaken a detailed mapping at this stage, and we're not certain that's of huge value to do it. But if there's a requirement from the user community for us to do that, then it's something we'll consider taking on board.